Good evening and welcome to Artist Talk on Art. On Monday, February 6th, 2023. I'm Doug Shear, President of ATOA. We're in the beginning of our 49th year. Founded in 1974, ATOA is the world's longest running and preeminent forum. Our archive resides at Archives of American Art of the Smithsonian. And this month we are adding to our collection, bringing our total at the archive to more than 1,000 recorded events featuring over 8,500 artists. Comments made tonight by our presenters do not necessarily reflect those of ATOA. Join us on Monday, February 13th for a legacy replay of a historic recording made in the 1990s of a dialogue between the author and former co-director of the Alternative Museum in Soho, Gino Rodriguez, and the late New York Times art critic, Hilton Kramer. That's Monday the 13th at 7 p.m. This event is being captured and delivered via Zoom and is recorded there. That recording will be posted to the Artist Talk on Art YouTube channel in a few more days. ATOA retains copyright of its recordings. The same recording will later become part of our permanent archive at Archives of American Art. Tonight's panel was organized by a fellow board member, Mitch Pilnick, who is also moderating the event. Please reserve your questions and comments until later, and you can compile those or write them into the chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and Mitch will select from them. I'd like to mention that Artist Talk on Art has a long history of inclusiveness of both women artists and many artists and curators of color. I would mention a few of the very many who have appeared over the almost 50 years of our series. Lowry Stokes Sims, Robert Blackburn, Howardina Pindell, Kehinde Wiley, Fred Wilson, Faith Ringgold, Romer Bearden, Osi Odu, Albert Depas, who was actually one time the ATOA president, Benny Andrews, a former board member of ATOA, Thelma Golden, and Ed Clark, and many others. And also a current board member, Peter Duhan. I'm just going to take a moment here to check to see if Mitch has arrived. I don't see him.
Yeah, I saw him on there.
Oh, you did? Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, that's comforting. Mitch Pilnick organized this panel and is the moderator. He holds an art history degree and is a longtime board member of ATOA. He has planned and moderated a number of panels and events for the organization. His main focus is the business of art, such as finances, insurance, marketing practices, artist residencies, and promotion, self-promotion for artists. Quote, assisting those who share my love of art and who speak the same language is my personal mantra. Helping others and promoting their business is what lights my inner flame. Connecting people, providing the greatest satisfaction. I'm always keeping an eye out for possible collaborations and partnerships between artists, organizations, galleries, etc., that can most reap the rewards of working together and expanding their network personally and professionally. And now, Mitch, wherever you are, join us. And unmute yourself.
I'm not seeing him on here.
He might have got kicked off because he was on the left side of the screen. I saw his name on there.
No, I'm not seeing him now.
Okay. So let's hope he'll come back.
back at the bottom, isn't he?
Yeah,
Mitch?
it would be nice to have him with us.
Mitch, are you there? You're muted.
Okay. Okay.
Mitch is there, but he's on mute.
Oh, he's on. Okay,
Do something with your ears.
Mitch, can you unmute yourself?
please. You did see him though again now? He's back
At the bottom.
at the bottom. Okay. Well, sometimes the bottom is the tops. Um,
He's talking, but
Oh,
we
there he is.
Okay,
Okay, unmute. How's that?
That's
Good.
perfect.
can't
Yes.
hear ourselves.
much better. You're much more charming when you're able to speak.
Yes.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Sorry.
Okay, anyway, welcome.
Where have we started?
We're getting a little feedback there.
Have we started at all?
We have, but we would like to invite you to join us.
Great.
You're now in charge. You're now in charge. I've now declared you
Okay.
person in charge. I'm passing you the baton, and jump right in and introduce the panelists.
Okay, great. So much for those who are attending this evening. This was very special as far as my putting this together during Black Lives Matter period. For about a month, I posted as far as support and exposure of African-American Black artists out there. And so this year I finally decided, let's do this, and very pleased as far as the 3 artists tonight, Aleathia Brown, Larry Rushing, and Khalid, Kha-Tees. Sabree was kind enough to participate. I appreciate, as I might have put in one of my announcements out there, how positive all 3 of them are. So I'm going to start off with Aleathia Brown, and Aleathia is there, right?
Yep, I'm here.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining me. I haven't seen Aleathia in a while, but let me start off by saying to know Aleathia is to love Aleathia. We met probably, I would say, around 2010, 2011.
Mhm.
A new invited me to come to Shishama, Harlem, where I met Aleathia, and he just showed me as far as her artwork, and most importantly, invited me to become a member or to attend the Harlem Arts Alliance, which I became a member for about a year, and very much enjoyed attending the monthly meetings and joining Aleathia and her friends and cousins afterwards for lunch. That was always a fun time, Aleathia, and I'm pleased that I own an Aleathia Brown original artwork and a Aleathia Brown calendar in addition. Aleathia is very much involved in the community. So very quickly, I will read her bio. For artist Aleathia Brown, creativity is more than a way to share personal expression. It is the path of spirituality, a connection to God, a litmus test by which she gauges her growth as a soul. Her vision is a poetic stream of realization that has been conceived by a lifetime of creative meditation, patience, and internal strength. Her art is expressed visually, verbally, in a variety of mediums in performance and didactically. Aleathia uses music, colors as cues to calm patrons, encouraging them to find shapes and forms while provoking conversations that tap in on the inner spirit. Inspired by movement, poetry, and storytelling, Aleathia's artworks evoke a visual journey using burlap, canvas, torn paper, and mixed mediums that produce bold and brilliant outcomes, thereby fostering new and sometimes surprising experiences. Just as far as time, you can take a look at her full bio on our website and her own website. So Aleathia, if you may
Yes.
begin your presentation, it'd be great. Thanks.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm gonna pull up what I have on my share. Let's see if I can. did I do- yeah. Can you all see it? No? Yes. Yeah. I'm gonna go back up to the top. Can you all hear me?
Yes. I can read.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for the amazing intro, and definitely it's been long overdue for us to see each other face to face. So I guess this will do for the moment. And I want to start out because I thought something interesting happened just a couple of days ago. I'm alumni from SVA, and somehow when they saw me posting it, I've got this beautiful bouquet of postings from them. So now I see the connection with you guys. So I mentioned that because I actually launched my business, Aleathia's Original Artworks, because of a scenario that happened in a class that I was taking in SVA. So I'm going to start with those images. I launched in 1989, May 9th, these images on a line of clothing. And part of it was a resistance response to a teacher who wouldn't give me a grade for these pieces. So he told the class my work was mediocre and I'd never amount to much of anything. And I find that it's interesting because I took that as motivation to launch my business and to, instead of going for a 9 to 5 or even a job at an advertising agency or something formal like that, I took that as an opportunity to say, well, how about I take specifically those images that weren't worthy of a grade and make it my business. So for that summer of 89 to maybe 91 or 92, my response was to put those images on every kind of wearable thing, do street fairs and all kinds of non-traditional events where I can showcase my work and sell it as wearable art. And when I, in return, got my first largest check, I went back to SVA and interrupted his class and showed him what he wouldn't grade and how the response came. So the positive side was, instead of letting it define or destroy me, I let it be my inspiration to really taking that leap and saying, instead of waiting years to take the chance of running my own and owning my own business, I started out fresh out of school working in that goal, and I have never looked back since. So I've been a career artist without a 9 to 5 job, always in this journey. So I'm celebrating, what is this, my mid-30s in terms of the years I've been a professional artist. And so my story is always telling stories in my work. And each of the pieces also have stories within stories. So even from the borders on these images, I took a magnifier. At the time in SVA was called the Lucy machine, and I magnified the texture of a basket from an African culture, a group in a particular area of Africa. I can't remember right now, but the magnification of that basket looked like grains of rice. And then my family is Geechee from the South. So rice, of course, is a connection. And then Sierra Leone, I found out years later, is also part of my roots. So it's interesting that historically, if you do what you do long enough, your cultural heritage comes up. So in terms of being an artist of color, I've actually been thinking about this all week. The title of this piece that we're speaking about today is What's It Like Being an Artist of Color? And it's a roller coaster, to say the least. The roller coaster is, what do you do with the challenges of other people's responses to you or your responses to yourself? And sometimes you champion through, and sometimes you reflect internally. So I feel like, as a woman in the arts, what I never wanted to do was just be good enough to be a woman artist. I wanted to be an artist. And there were periods of times I wanted the label artist of color, and there were moments I wanted to be an artist, period, and not by gender, not by color. So there's this slippery slope about, when you're a brown person making art, which side of the coin are you on? and I'll tell this because my mom is even on here. She always said to me, even at the early stages of me in elementary school as an artist, she would always say, you don't get the luxury as a Black person to just do whatever you want. You represent your culture, so do a little bit for your cultural heritage and then do whatever you want. So there was this toss between me being able to do so many things, which is why when people look at a body of my work, they see so many different styles. So these pieces that I'm showing here, I was listening to some jazz music one night in my studio at Chishama that Mitch was talking about, and these were the images that started appearing on the page while I was putting the paint. So I really didn't allow myself to overthink what I was doing. It was really more about just being in the flow of that energy. And that's what I mean by when you look at this, you're not seeing a Black artist, you're not seeing hopefully just what gender of an artist, you're just seeing the images and the flow of it and how the music is taking me. There are times I'm deliberately wanting my Blackness to come through. And so this was part of a series that I did on warriors. I started doing some research because I had an exhibit at the chaplaincy headquarters in Midtown on the East Side. And they sat me in this non-denominational room and left me there and said, stay as long as you want, think about what you want to do. And what started speaking to me about the energy in that space is art and spirituality. And then what started resonating was Japanese warriors and African warriors. And I started doing a whole lot of research on the similarities of the warrior, not at war, but where they are as people, as humans. They're loyal, they're methodical, they're quiet, they're extremely clean and about family and community. And there were all these messages that started coming forward. So this piece was an acrylic piece, one of I think 9 pieces. So these are also from that warrior series. So the red represents the blood, but that blood is the passion and the unity between the two. So as an artist of color, and coming from a family that did nothing but tell stories all day long, I want the stories to be something available when someone is asking, but I also like when people look at my work and see their own stories or connect to their own cultural stories or life stories, if you will. And so I took a journey with these pieces when I went to put them in the space for that very first time. And it just gave me pleasure of having the license to do what I wanted, not by someone else's direction or intention. So being an artist of color, there's that weight on one shoulder of doing work that represents you, because if you don't, since we are marginalized and so rarely seen in spaces on the next level, which I call the next level, where you have the independence of coming and moving as you please and getting paid well. So these are works that I got to do just because. So this is abstract faces. And again, I'm always playing with patterns and movement, and stories are sometimes being told in the colors I use. I often say I play with color like children play with toys. And as an artist of color, and my name is Brown, so it's like I was divinely meant to play with color because I'm named after a color, right? And so I use color as messages and as information and sort of as a way to bring people away from just looking at the brownness, but you can tell the energy of someone with some passion and intensity. So for me, this is a close-up of a piece that I did in the early 2000s. I wanted to show, and as you see the title on the top, Unchained is the name of the piece. It's just a zoom in of what the whole piece looks like. But for me, Unchained is not just about the physical chains as a person of color, as someone who moves through all these spaces with all these different layers of challenges. But unchain is, in order for you to be free, you have to unchain the way you think. You have to unchain the experiences that you have and the weight of things that you carry. So there's disparity, there's emotions, there's a physicality, and each frame on the piece is showing different types of chained and unchained. You know, it's always a story within a story. But I'll tell you the other tidbit about this. I had a jar of acrylic paint, black, and I didn't have the money to buy paint, and I had this vision of this piece. So I boiled some water and I began to just work and beat this paint until it softened up. And I just used every hue of black and diluted black to do this piece. And I said, it's also unchaining is don't let something stop you because of other limitations or boundaries. So the unchained had an unchained inside of it just by the fact that I had to use what I had, and I couldn't make any excuses that I can't paint because I didn't have the money or something else blocking me. So that's another layer of the unchained that goes with that piece. Whenever I look at it, that is. Let's begin anew. I was in Bronx community before I went to SVA, and Phi Theta Kappa used to have me doing artwork for them and writing little stories to my work for different things that they were doing. So this was actually a piece that I did with an article, and it's really talking about the Black man and the Black boy, and how, in some who know about the stories of slavery, is men and boys were separated, and nothing more defining than how you remove people from their identity when you take them from each other to be able to not pass that baton. So these two faces are the brokenness of these two not being able to have a united front with each other. So that's what the Let's Begin Anew, by putting them back together, we unbreak that chain. My other passion as an artist is texture, and I like to work on burlap. So this is a close-up of a burlap piece that I was doing when I was preparing for a show at Art Basel 2018. I like to use Adinkra and Underground Railroad symbols because they're messages of fleeing to freedom. And I'm always, as an artist of color, there's this thing or obsession with freedom, owning my own freedom and not letting someone define what I can or cannot do. So I think there's a connection with me and these symbols because they have those kinds of stories that they told. On that yellow space, that figure, if you will, is an Adinkra symbol that means energy. And so you see the fingers that are in that pose, like, meditation and yoga. So I'm always using, visual stories as messages. This is what the piece looks like in its entirety. It's burlap on a closet pole, and I like to deconstruct the burlap. So that's another way of me unraveling that energy. So many of those shapes are Adinkra symbols. The big, bold, black shape that has the face that I added and embellishes. Hiname, it means supreme being, nothing before God. So I'm using symbols as also ways to bring conversations in about energy and that freedom, if you will. This is another burlap piece, and it's called Play It Again, Man. Play It Again, Man is, again, the story with this is a friend of mine for her birthday was laying across the couch. She had been shaving her head for many years, and I also started an organization in 2012, Unveiled Unlocked. We celebrate and illuminate the hair-free men and women, namely of color. Another underrepresented group of people in a sea of people with hair, and the hair shaming and all these emotions. But I thought there was something beautiful about the contour of a shaved head. And some years later, in between that photo I took of her, there was a group of friends of mine from music and art who serenaded me at one of my birthdays in East Harlem at a supper club. And so this was the silhouette of them serenading the lady in red. So I really basically fused two stories together to make this one on this burlap that's been, again, reconstructed and deconstructed by me, unraveling the edges so that they're like tassels and on that closet pole. So for me, the color of my skin is not just who I am, it's the energy and in the DNA. Moods of Color is a piece that I did because I'm always looking at the hustle and bustle living in New York City, where people and crowds are moving around each other in patterns, like colors are in patterns, like shapes are in patterns. If you look at a group of people in even numbers long enough, eventually they start migrating in patterns. I've looked at train platforms where people were doing all kinds of things like that. But for me, color was not just the brownness of my skin, it was also the vibrancy. And the color is not just red because I like red, it's the energy or the aura that was coming off of people who were moving in those spaces, and sometimes a spirit of energy too. So for me, art and spirituality is another portal to what I'm often putting into my work, whether you know it or not, or whether you hear me talk about it, is the source of when I'm working. And in the silence of my studio or wherever I'm working at, the music I have on is spiritually guiding me to the colors that I'm using are telling a story. I'm not using purple in this piece. I'm using the energy of what happens with the royalty of purple. And there's other stories about what each color means to me before I'm even examining whether, is this what I like? Is this what I move to? So this is one sculpture out of plaster, and it's found objects that are also mounted to it, and it's 3 faces, because just like in African culture, like the Sankofa, you have the face that looks forward, the face that looks back, but I have the one looking up at the sun. There's 3 phases of life. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's also a past life and the things that we are looking over our shoulder at that we don't always understand. So I'm telling stories with colors, patterns, but the spirituality is never leaving where my DNA is, you know, and the pattern.
Could you tell us what the dimensions are?
On this one,
Yes.
maybe 24 by 12 by 4, somewhere in that. You know, it could probably go as wide as maybe my laptop, the faces, and the stand is like a third of that size. The stand is wooden, and there's layers of friend of mine, when I first got my studio in Harlem, had left a bouquet of flowers, and there was in the vase some eucalyptus, some lavender, some purple eucalyptus, and I kept them all through the 10 years that I had that studio. So I put some of them on her face, because this, again, I'm using the elements around me. But the reason why I called that Moods of Nature, I used to collaborate a trip up to the Wellington Herbs and Spice Farm that was owned by a Black couple. And we would take these sort of one-day retreats up there for wellness. And one of the days we were getting ready to board the bus to come back downstate, this big cloud of purple mass was coming from across the valley, and it was moving so rapid we thought it was going to be a rain cloud. And as it moved over us, we couldn't even get to the bus quick enough. If it had been rain, we would have been drenched. But it was just this purple mass, and it kept moving past us. So I was fascinated about how the mood of nature can change in a second, and you don't have even a warning to run for cover or to see what it's going to do. Is it going to be benign or violent? And so the mood of nature were all these different shades of purple. And if you weren't standing there in the moment, you would have missed all the hues that it had. So I tried to put as many of those textures and colors of purples that I saw in that frame of a moment. So that's what this was. Now, this is my other phase of me. I do live art. I started right after 9/11 because I said, you know, all the outpouring of humanity that happens after 9/11, people helping each other and really showing humanity at a loving level. I said, eventually when people go back to regular living, that's gonna fade. And I kept trying to think of what human thing I could do. And the inner silence in my voice said, you're an artist, that's your assignment, just make art. So I began doing these live art things on stages with a poet and a musician. And so this piece in particular, I hand tore some newsprint paper while I was on a stage, and this was one of 5 that I did in that night. So I'm on the stage, and my friend is doing his poetry, and my other friend is playing saxophone and walking through the aisles. And I took the mattress from my futon, took it apart, turned it into a dress, and I had another artist wear it, and the audience painted on her. So, and then by the way, I got married to my art 2020 in January, and I wore that canvas dress after 15 years of people in public spaces painting on it. So this piece is called Sitting on Attitude. And I think because as a Black woman, you know, people are always putting a lot of focus on your derriere or your attitude. And in my tongue-in-cheek way, I'm saying I'm sitting on my attitude. That's the part where everybody is focused on. So there it is. You know, I kind of sometimes play with the things that are so negative and ignorant. So that's my take on it. This is a live art piece called Community. Interestingly, I did it at that Music Supper Club in East Harlem, my old stomping grounds. But I didn't use a paintbrush at all on this. I used a brayer and my fingers. So those lines with the black are my fingers and those ovals are my fingerprints, because community is how we touch each other, how we touch each other's lives. And so I wanted my hands to be touching the canvas, if you will, and showing the community. My mother is still very much a community activist. And so for me, community is how I grew up in a house with a person who was always securing how safe community was going to be wherever we lived as children. So for me, community is the rough, torn edges makes you want to come up close and personal. And the colors are vibrant, but they're telling that story of community and how light sources are moving through our energy in the core. So this was a piece that I actually raffled off this past year, just celebrating community. The next piece is I was commissioned to work on a mural in Harlem. Oddly enough, I started learning so much about the block that we were doing this work on. So this youth organization had me doing a series of art sessions with a high school over by Marcus Garvey Park. The mural actually got moved like 3 times before we wound up on this block on 146. It's one of 3 walls. And again, I'm telling a story. I'm using Adinkra symbols and I'm using faces that are iconic, Marcus Garvey. And oddly enough, when we began to prime the wall and begin the work, still working on the sketches, literally as I was working on this piece, one of the caretakers said, you know, you're going to get a lot of riff from the community because there was a prior mural on the wall that was unfinished, but everybody recognized it as my brother's keeper, if you will. There was a section on it that said that. So I decided to incorporate some parts of that as well. And then I started finding out on the left side where it's the gray shades of gray, I have on that wall James Baldwin. The night before we started, I was at St. Nick Park and they were showing his movie, I'm Not Your Negro, and it just struck me. I totally threw out all the sketches that I had from the preliminaries, and this needed to be the center focal point. James Baldwin is my dude. I've always loved him, but I found out as we were working on this mural that he lived on 146th Street, which the block, you know, stretches up the hill. So how ironic is that? And it's also 2 blocks from where my great-grandfather was living in Harlem when he migrated from the South to Harlem. So it's like, there's a lot of history. I used to skate up that hill. Just there's so many parts to it that became unfolded, however, as people saw what we were doing. So this is some close-ups of that wall as well. And it really was a journey and a half telling that story. I am Harlem. I wrote a poem to the piece, and there's so many just layers of stories inside of stories on each of the walls. But I wanted the heritage and the pride of the community, and I wanted to make them understand I was coming to bring something and not take something away when we had to work over that prior mural and do the work that we did. But so every part of this, even the colors that I used, was telling a story. That marigold, you know, is Oshun, and the types of colors that I was using was intentional in keeping that cultural heritage ribboning through. Everything that I did on these mural walls, these 3 walls, were from references that I got from the Schomburg Library, which is my favorite place to find references about my history, my culture, my story, my identity. So Remember When is a watercolor that I did about 14 by 31, the size of it. a poet friend of mine had a photograph of his son and brother in the doorway of his mom's house, and he did a poem, Remember, Remember, and it talks about the past. He gave me this photograph. I let it sit on my desk forever, and it fell out of a notebook, and finally I was ready for it to speak to me. Artists often say, what are you motivated by when you look at your work and the work you're doing? I wait in quiet spaces for the work to begin to speak to me. And what germinates is a spiritual energy or something that's infinite in time. So it doesn't have to just be in this moment that it expires. So for me, it's the timelessness of these boys looking at this laundry on the balcony drying on a hot summer day, and me using color to illuminate the energy of how hot that moment was with them having to sit in a door ajar. And so I always show this piece, but I also have the poet's piece that I sell whenever I sell prints of this. Now, this piece right here is called Sanvi. That word I looked up after I did the piece, and it had to speak to me. It's a Hindu warrior. She is about prosperity, not just financially, but spiritually. So what you can't see in this photograph is all those orangish colors are actually copper. There are clocks up in the sky because she's sitting on one of the oldest time dials, and I took some elements off of it and put my own coding, if you will, of patterns on it. On the center of her back is a hourglass. And so down below, what I didn't know at the time, I had gone to Materials for the Arts, and I had gotten a book that I deconstructed and mounted all 2/3 of it. One of the pages flipped over on the floor one night when I was working on mounting the pages, and it was a friend of mine's name on the page. Then I flipped the jacket over and found out this was a book on Yoruba art and spirituality. 9 of the artists in the book were friends of mine. I didn't know when I got the book. So there's always some kind of spirit or energy or cultural thing that happens in the process of me making my work. But I had gotten a grant with City Corp, and this was the piece that I unveiled the year before last for that project. And I had 3 poems that I performed with a musician in the Kente Royal Gallery in Harlem. So there's layers of stories that I won't go into, but now the owner of this is the lead person of Girls Night Live, an online company that I do virtual workshops with. So this is another burlap piece. We were asked to do a piece using our visual voice that would speak to the essence of Basquiat. Like, what if you were in your voice speaking of something? And so this called Try New Thoughts was something that I did on burlap, and which you can't see in the center where that rectangle grid is. There are these little figures that are moving about as if you were looking at it from an aerial view. There's an envelope at the top, and it's just my symbolic way of saying you've got mail and how it's floating in space. And there's this leash that's like a lifeline, but the red represents that blood instead of that umbilical cord. But there's life and energy of you in that surrender position, which is the figure that's kneeling. And there's so many other stories, but you know, I'm using color. And for me, oddly enough, I don't put the horizon line because sky and water have that blue. And so there's an energy coming off of it. What if it didn't have a line to divide it? How would we change our thoughts about how we view space and the energy that we're in space? And the figures are in white because they're in a ending or a beginning, because the white can represent either one. So I'm always, like I said, spiritually telling a story, visually telling a story, and a play with color. So when I play with color,
Althea, I think you need to shorten this.
wrapping up. Okay,
Yeah, for the sake of your co-presenter.
I'm at the last 2.
Okay.
Okay, so this is part of a series of body parts. They're all done in colored pencil. On one side, I'm playing with the dark hues of that one color. On the other side, the right is the light colors, and each of the body parts on that series are raised, so it's kind of like pop art. And I'll go to this last one. This is called Coffee Stain Love, and I literally stained the hand-torn paper, and it's talking about love is so blind you can't always see the differences between us. And I'll end it there.
Great. Thank you so much, Aleathia.
Thank
Very
you.
much appreciate your great presentation and your artwork. Going to move along to Larry Rushing. And Larry, I had met just in the last year, thanks to fellow board member Jacqueline Rada. And we met at her studio, and Larry invited myself and my friend to attend the solo show that he was having at the time. This is going back to April of last year. And it was called The Feminine, Divine, Entangled Transparency at the El Barrios Art Space, PS 109 on 99th Street. Larry Rushing is a New York City-based artist working in oil and water-based media. His roots are both rural and urban. Born on a farm in rural Georgia, he was delivered by his great-grandmother, the local midwife and matriarch. He spent his adolescence in the inner city of Miami, Florida, and ultimately received a BFA from the University of Miami and an MFA from Tyler School of Art, Temple University, before moving to New York City. Rushing's work was recently exhibited at the Dayton Art Institute in the AAVAG Black Heritage Through Visual Rhythms exhibition. He has had 2 solo shows in New York City in the spring of 2022, the one I mentioned at El Barrio, and Improvised Rhythms of an Urban Setting at Rio 2 Gallery. Larry Rushing is shown widely in New York City as part of the Federation of Modern Painters and Sculptors, and in several galleries and virtually throughout the artsy group Splice Connectors. Rushing's paintings are owned by collectors throughout the United States. And Larry, I thank you so much for participating tonight.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks for having me, and thanks to all those who are out there in the video world viewing this. I'm very pleased and honored to be a part of this talk tonight. I'm a fine art painter, and my medium is oil and or water-based medium. I paint from sizes anywhere from a 12 by 12 to 5 feet by 6 feet. I work from life, created and or found still lives. And what I do is that I try to utilize 2 different locations, that being the urban and the rural. So a little background about technique, the things that I would like for you to think about as I talk to you and share my story and show you my work. 4 components that I'm very interested in, that is space, opacity, opposed to transparencies, organic and geometric angles, contrasting each other, settling on and utilizing the improvisational rhythm via linear quality of the design of jazz, that being Ornette Coleman, Charlie Parker, and John Coltrane. Now, before I show you my work, I want to just tell you that my philosophy is that, and my belief is that femininity is the universal source of creativity. So as I show you my work and talk to you about it and go through the whole process of what I go about developing it and what have you, it is hopefully it will enhance that philosophy, and it's all derived from my great-grandmother and my rearing, because she was first generation out of slavery, so that makes me about the 4th down the way, but she raised me, and this is where it all began. So on that note, I want to share my screen with you, and we'll talk about the work as we go down. Yeah, the first painting that you're going to be seeing, that you're looking at right now, is, let me see, hold on a second. Yeah, the first painting is called Open Window. And of course, it's a still life. As I say, I paint from created and found still lives. And what I do is I formulate the still life, and then I try to develop the design and establish the rhythm and move from there. But this is one of the earlier paintings that I did, but it as I said, I use geometric and organic angles contrasting each other with a linear quality, but it'll be better explained and better seen as we progress through the paintings. The next one is, okay, now here we go. The fact is that Mitch had just told you that I was from the rural setting, first part of my life, first part of my decade, existence was in the rural setting, and that was a place, a little town called Eastman, Georgia. And I think our nearest neighbor was about 3 miles, and then the nearest town where we did our grocery shopping was about 25 miles, where we went to celebrate on the weekend. And the thing that I want to make about this is I call it Georgia Intersection. This is the name of the painting. It's a small painting, but the writing on the wall there to your right, it says Wilcox Cafe. Now, that particular cafe, the door to it, which you can't, well, you probably can't see, I can't see because I have you on the screen, but is where I met my father for the first time. And I think I was like 12 years old, once and only. I didn't never see him again, but I did meet him in that cafe. And so what I do with my work, I'm trying to do a couple of things, well, many things. Of course, like I said, space is important, transparency as opposed to opacities, that's just the artistic endeavor, and also organic and geometric angles to create that whole rhythm with the improvisation and linear quality that I think that I'm superimposing via jazz. But this particular piece, this doorway, was the entrance to the restaurant where, as I stated earlier, where I had met my father. The one and only time that I had met him and got to know he was my dad and spoke with him. So when I went back to Georgia after 25 years or so, I went to the door, and this is basically what it looked like. It had fallen apart, and it was all grown up and, you know, things. Of course, I improvised a little bit by adding glasses and tobacco cans and stiletto heels and bugs and things like that. But that was just an artist liberty that I was taking. The corner store that we had, this is called Corner Store. And the story behind this is simple, is that when we lived so far out in the rural section of Georgia, like I said, our nearest neighbor was 3 miles. The nearest store was 4 miles, and it was called the Gardenville, but I named this painting Corner Store. And it basically was the place that we went to get the essentials that we couldn't raise on the farm, because literally ate and lived off the farm and off of what we raised and produced. But I didn't know I was going to be a painter back then, but after I did discover it, of course, this is one of my paintings called The Corner Store. Moving on to the next one. This is called, this particular painting, I'm laughing because it's called The Big House, but it wasn't truly the big house. I mean, there was about 5 miles from where I was living, because my great-grandmother was the matriarch, was a midwife, and she was the matriarch of our family and actually the midwife of the county. But so I was exposed to the whole county, and there were within the area of a 10, 20-mile radius of what was known as the Big House. It was a house, it was a big white house, and it was a plantation. And it owned people, actually owned people who lived there. And, you know, not willingly, but they own it. And it did actually was a big house. So this was my presentation of the Big House, because what I do with my art is that I'm trying to do a couple of things. One thing is I want to elevate, honor, and express the beauty and the profound urgency to recognize femininity as being the source of our existence through every species. I think it's not understood or accepted or even recognized. So my art is devoted to that. And the reason I got there and how I got there was basically because my great-grandmother raised me. And as I said, she was the midwife, and she was the one who took me from my mother from birth. And from birth to 11 years old until her transition, I was her companion, or she was mine, I would like to think, but she took me everywhere with her, even as a baby. And when she was going to deliver the babies in the county. And it wasn't only Black babies, it was white babies, it was any baby that came in Dodge County, Eastman, Georgia. Cassie Peacock was the midwife. And I was the little boy who was there. Not as an assistant, not even knowing what was going on, but experiencing it. And later when I became an artist, I decided that I wanted to honor her. Now, this particular painting is called The Back Porch. And I did this painting because it was commissioned by someone. This is not my great-grandmother, but she did sit on the porch like this and painted and shell peas, butter beans and things like that, and made the dinner for us, which was, I say my great-grandmother, so I was really raised, I'm back up a little bit, I was raised by my great-grandmother and my great-uncles. Okay, those were my parents, and she was the matriarch and took control of everything. And of course, our back porch looked something similar to this, but when I got that commission and the person asked me to paint a painting and he was sharing a story with me, and my story kind of resonated in my heart and my soul. And so consequently, I went out and then I did a little research and I said, okay, I think I can do this. And this is what I came up with. This particular painting is called The Back Porch. Now, this particular painting is Uncle Pig. Now, this is my uncle. This is truly with my father. He and my great-grandmother raised me. And this is the way he liked to sit. And that's the attitude he had when he sat there. And he never made eye contact. He would say a couple of words and that was it. And I went back to see him just before his transitioning after I had become a young man, and my mother had taken me out and put me into the inner city. I went back to see him and I took a picture, and later on I made a painting of it. This particular piece is called Root Desire. And I said that because I was reminiscing about how I used to roam the countryside, the roads past the farms, through the woods with my dogs, not my animals, with the dogs and my weapon. I was raised on a farm and I was illiterate until I was 11 years old, but I could shoot, drive a tractor, and do anything else a farmer could do. And I stayed there and did that. And so this painting has a reminiscence with me about the times and the roads that I used to travel, because back then at that time we had light poles in the country where they have the wires go down the side of the road, across the field, in the branches, and you always walk. I used those to navigate and to kind of know where I was, or the next farm was going to be, or the next house, or a situation that I was going to encounter. Root Desire. This particular piece is called Farmhouse. Our house looks somewhat like this from the rear. I took the liberty as an artist to put in a nude figure there, but you would never see that actually in real life where I grew up, because I didn't know what nudity was. I mean, never having experienced it until I came to the inner city. But anyway, this was just another painting that I did and I like. Our house actually looks somewhat like this. And I call this Triassic Farm. all these paintings I'm talking about now has to do with my rural upbringing. And this is just an expression of me and what I encountered. And now that I'm trying to formulate this whole process of expressing my inner being and my inner existence and the experience that I had in a rural setting, opposed to the experience I'm having in the urban setting, this is just a notation on that. I grew up plowing fields, planting corn, peanuts, cotton, you name it. I did it, picked it, plowed it, and lived with it. Quart these jars and things, they are what my grandmother and I used to have to shell peas for, and we canned the vegetables in the summer so that we could eat through the winter. So we actually, the only thing we got from the store was probably candy canes, those red candy sticks, what we call them, peppermint sticks. That's it, peppermint sticks. That's the only thing we would get, because we get ice cream and peppermint sticks and go to town. That's what we got. But everything else we raised on the farm, and our backyard looked somewhat like this. JD is the tractor that I learned how to drive on when about 5 years old. And then until I learned how to drive, prior to that, where you see the lamp between the two wheels is where I used to stand on the back and hold to the back of the seat. And once I got big enough to touch the pedals, my uncles put me on top of on the seat and taught me how to drive it. And at 5, 6 years old, I was farming and driving this tractor. This is a 1952 JD John Deere tractor. Now we're moving into the inner city. My mother picked me up when I was 11 years old, took me from my uncles through some chaos and family arguments or whatever, but she was my birth mother. And so she took me to the city. And then I began to, after high school, and went into the Marines, came out, and then I decided what I want to do. We go to college. And when I was going to college, it was during the hippie era. And I didn't learn how to paint a little bit, so I did a self-portrait of myself. And that's what I thought I was cool. This particular painting is called Dorothy. This is adjacent to my aunt's apartment. We lived in the government projects. And the blue behind her is the water on the streets that settle on the streets when it rains, when the big storms come through Florida and rain. And the water just puddles there, and then you could see your reflection in the water or the car across the streets or whatever. And anyway, we used to sit out on the sidewalk, and this is Dorothy, who is my cousin's wife that I asked to photograph and made a painting of. Now we are moving into Philadelphia, where I first encountered graffiti on walls. I had never experienced that before. And the brick walls and brownstones. This is called Philly. And I had then begun to formulate the overall ethos of how I was going to present myself as an artist, because I didn't know. I was just groping and trying to make the discovery. And so then I did this particular painting called Philly. Of course, you can see the light bulbs and all the broken fixtures and things in that, but still life setting. This is called Sidewalk View. This is after I had experienced that part of Philly where you could see brownstones, of which I had never experienced before, because in Florida, there is no such thing as a brownstone. And of course, it influenced me. And of course, I made a painting of it, utilizing the light bulbs, because again, that was something new that I had to ingestate and to become a part, make a part of me. And long stem glasses and a thing. Rooftop is, now I'm into my genre of presenting myself and knowing what I want to do, knowing what I want to say and how I want to say it. So this now we can talk more about the transparency as opposed to the opacities. And glass to me presents a certain amount of elegance. And I find I'm intrigued by crystal glass. And glass, when you break it, it breaks spontaneously. It breaks according to the pressure and and the weakness of the glass. You cannot dictate how the glass is going to break unless you can absolutely control the pressure that you're applying, and still you can't control it because it's a spontaneous breakage according to the weakness. It goes, wherever the crack goes, that's where the weakest part of the glass is. And then I'm into that whole thing about linear quality and the improvisational rhythm. And so I used rooftop to kind of substantiate those transparencies opposed to opacities, and also find the rhythm in the linear quality that I want to use by showcasing the rhythm, improvisational rhythm of jazz. This particular painting is painting Jacqueline probably would know Vince. We were out to Vince. Vince is also a painter and a part of the Federation of Modern Painters, where I met Jacqueline. And I was out at his house having a little picnic one evening, and he took me out in his backyard, and I was so impressed by it. And then it reminded me of where I had grew up in the porch that I had in Georgia. So I combined the two, his garden with the back porch that I had left in Georgia, and made this painting, and it's called Mirrored Entity. This is Autumn Leaves, my fascination with living in the concrete jungle, and watching the autumn and the fall when the leaves change, and then the trees begin to become bare, and you can see the city kind of begin to expose itself around Central Park. So I was intrigued by that. Of course, each one of my paintings all over, you're going to see it's a continuous kind of a situation where you will always be exposed to femininity. The heels represent femininity. There'll be lipstick. There'll be something about the female component, because femininity exists everywhere in everything, and I think that it should be recognized. And so this is my call. I think I'm presenting myself as a vehicle to elevate and honor that in every aspect that I can possibly do through my art. All right, this painting is 92 panes. I was intrigued by how you could look out your window in New York or in somebody else's window and see them going up the stairs. And or you in your library, you're supposed to be doing your business, you go to pull your blinds down and you happen to look out the window and somebody else next door, you can see what they're doing. And I was like, okay, well, I got to do this. I made 92 panes behind the shrubbery, and then the broken glass, again, with that organic geometric angles contrasting and expressing itself. But of course, I'm back to my form thing. Now I'm beginning to combine two situations. And the combination is that the horseshoe on the back of the wall on the right-hand side, which brings in, now I'm beginning to try to bring together the rural and urban and showcase how they are both intermingled, and how I experience it as an individual, not necessarily meaning that is truly the way it is, but how I experience it. Because being raised in the rural and then moving to the city, it's impossible not to bring that with you. Now I know that I'm an artist and I'm feeling great about what I'm doing. So it's like, okay, but I still have to bring it closer to home. And so then I painted my easel. One of the first easel I ever had, it was a gift. I painted it and I put a chain on it. So I'm still just trying to play with that transparency opposed to opacity, and that linear quality and the rhythm and the lines and the movement throughout the design of the composition. This painting is called Orchid Leaf. Orchid Leaf is in my studio. This is a corner of my studio. In actuality, it is the southeast corner of my studio. And I set up a still life there. And I'm intrigued by orchids. Orchids intrigue me because it remind me of female. I see the elegance, I see the beauty, I see the softness, and it just resonates with me as a female. It's very delicate, but it is very strong. And then there's my favorite orchid is called the ghost orchid. And I think it only grows in Florida in the Everglades. And it's a rare thing, but of course I can't get it. But anyway, I was representing, again, like I say, representing that whole feminine thing about femininity, trying to bring it to a whole, trying to juxtapose the urban with the rural. Last but not least painting is where I think now that I have settled in totally on my being, with the influence of my great-grandmother birthing me, raising me, and taking me while she birthed other people into the world, and being then exposed to the inner city, and then understanding and embracing and accepting it, and coming to grips with being a man and knowing what I want to say, how I want to say it, and what I want to say. I'm now putting it together. And I think this painting is basically a combination of all of that. And I say that to say this, because on the left-hand side of the painting, you see the CD rack. That is my jazz thing. And on the right far lower corner, you see the broken light bulb. And just next to that, you got the lamp. That is the country. That is my country. That's the first light I ever knew. We used lamps and we had fireplaces. We did, and maybe if we were lucky, you had a flashlight. But so I put all of that together, and then of course, I had the chains and the broken glass and the shoes. Well, it's just to create the rhythm and to establish the fact that femininity is and always will be the most powerful thing on earth, as far as I'm concerned. And hopefully my art, if you look at more of my art, hopefully it will state that and make clear that my philosophy be even clearer. I mean, I love painters like Dean Mitchell and Carrie James Marshall. Of course, then we can talk about Dolly, and we can talk about Romeo Bearden and all those guys, but each one of them had something to say. And my thing is, I hope in my period of time on this earth that I can make this statement and be understood and help people to realize the beauty of femininity via our existence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. It's a great presentation and great artwork. We're going to move on to the third and final panelist this evening, and that would be Khalid Sabree, otherwise known as Kha-Tees, Kha-Tees. And I met Khalid February of 2018 when he was a participating artist in the AD art show put on by Maria Van Lodrop. And the premise of her art fair was for artists to submit artwork to be accepted with a graphic arts background. So I met Khalid, and I believe it was at Sotheby's where the art fair was. And anybody who meets Khalid is like instantly drawn to him because he is just a warm and fuzzy big bear of a guy. And his artwork is very different from Aleathia's and Larry's. Khalid is very much of a marketer. So it's not just artwork paintings, but he is involved as far as in marketing on clothing, etc., which he'll go into. And one of the other reasons that I was very drawn to having Khalid participate this evening was just from following his, especially during the pandemic, following his Instagram posts, because he very much, as Aleathia and Larry, both have very much a sense of family and community. So Khalid, thank you so much for participating, and go right ahead.
Hi, I'm not going to be too long because everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, my name is Khalid Sabree. I'm going to share screen. Share screen. So I have like 5 paintings, and I'm going to basically get into going. Yeah. One of the things listening to Aleathia and Larry, I heard their background about the South, was my wife is from Georgia, and I grew up, and my mother's from North Carolina. And so this listening to you guys really inspired me to keep going, basically, because you guys come from the same background that I come from. Well, this and that, and then Aleathia talked about Harlem. So with me, I was very much, I grew up with jazz from my father's generation. And then I grew up listening to hip hop as it started. So a lot of my work combines those two elements. This piece called The New Harlem Renaissance was done, was like 4 years ago. I was trying to express the newness of Harlem, not in a negative way, like people talk about gentrification, but more that, you know, those of us who grew up, there was the old Harlem with my mother's generation who came in the 50s, and then there was me who grew up in the 70s and 80s, and there's a difference. So that's what basically this piece represents, the new Harlem Renaissance, as opposed to the old Renaissance. What's the other one? This piece is called Shu Was a God in Egypt. In Egyptology is a god called Shu, but it was a spiritual, represented a spirituality, not so much of a god, but it was SHU. And I'm connecting the sacredness of the Shu of the Egyptology and how we of this generation worship the shoe in the sense of Adidas and Nike and all these other things. And I was trying to play on that with, like it says, material is not long lasting. And it talks about, I'm really speaking against the materialistic view we have of sneakers and things like that. And how I think a lot of African-American younger persons spend too much money, in my opinion. And that's why he's wearing one shoe, because he couldn't afford the other one. And that's like a play on like the amount, how much sneakers cost at this point. There's another sneaker reference. It's saying all sneaker companies are the same. This is done like 3 or 4 years ago, before the whole Kanye and Kyrie thing. But what I found out was that Puma is related to Adidas, and that they're brothers, and that all sneaker companies are doing all the same thing, whether it's New Balance, Y3, and all that. In reference to the consumer, the way we grew up in hip hop, we thought we were being different. We thought we were competing with each other by wearing a Puma or Adidas or a Nike, and we would like, oh, I have this, you have that. But in reality, those sneaker companies are together, and there's a relationship that we didn't know of, the consumer, and that we should, in my opinion, we should be more careful to not get into the whole materialistic view of sneaker culture. What's the other thing? This one is called No More Gallery Control, and it shows African-American kid holding a billion Bitcoin, like a billionaire Bitcoin. And it's talking about NFTs, and it's talking about the move from galleries, needing galleries to come up as an artist. And that probably the next 10 years, I don't think that's going to be the main place to get art expressed. Basically that's what this is about. And again, I'm very much influenced by the whole early 80s Basquiat, Warhol, and Haring expression with my artwork. Was that it? Sorry. Oh, and this is my last piece that I was done during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic. I had a studio in the Bronx, and this is one of the pieces I made. Everyone was wearing masks, and it was kind of like a burden in the beginning. And we know it was very serious, or people were dying, but the burden of the mask was like, it was almost like a being trapped. So these are 3 Black males wearing masks. Some eyes are covered. The one always to the far right is Virgil Abloh. The middle one is a basketball player, and the other one is Frank Ocean. They had nothing to do with what I was trying to express, but it's just that these images I saw in GQ magazine, and it just fit my what I was trying to express in here. It's called Social Creatures, and I was going off the term where they said social distancing, and that kind of felt wrong, like social distancing. It should have been like physical distancing as opposed to social distancing, because we're social creatures. We're social, and the word "an-nas" means in Arabic it means the human being, and that's why they're all together, and they're all together because I don't think we should ever socially distance. I think we should physically distance, but not socially distance. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Share.
Khalid, okay.
Yes.
Alrighty, so yours was the shortest as far as amount of time, so I want to ask you a couple of questions. What was the artwork that's behind you? Can you talk about that?
That's called Boom Bip. Again, it's connected to my father. I did it as an homage to my father, who played jazz records all the time in the house. The famous jazz persons that Larry was talking about: Coleman, Miles, Thelonious. I just heard all that growing up as a child, and so in the painting, the person is playing a trumpet and he's also DJing. So the DJing part is how I grew up listening to hip hop, and all the other things these are names of jazz artists and hip hop artists all combined together. And it's talking about that we come from the same expression. My father came up very rough environment. I grew up in a rough environment in the projects in Harlem, and jazz comes out of that same expression. I don't agree with everything hip hop has come out with, but it comes out of an expression of needing something. So that's the title of this piece. And I made a T-shirt of the same piece called Boom Bip. And the boom bip is also the sound of the drum that's played in jazz, and then also the sound of the beat makers in hip hop. Yeah.
Now you also, in addition to T-shirts, you do sneakers also and other clothing?
Well, I really, because like Aleathia was saying about her pieces, I really like to just paint on everything. So I do paint on T-shirts and stuff, and I did a commission for sneakers, and basically, yeah, I paint on jackets and things, and that kind of the idea of seeing my artwork walk, that was the whole feeling, like seeing it walk away from you. Or like
Sure.
one time I saw one of my t-shirts across the street, I was just like, it's so awesome. It's just a feeling like everyone doesn't want a piece in their house, but some people won't wear it. So yeah.
So as far as your Instagram posts, and like the recent one you did, as far as your Muslim background, does that come into your artwork at all?
Yeah, I mean, it does not, in because I used to, when I first started, I learned how to do calligraphy, Arabic calligraphy, but I thought that was too what's the word? Just like typical. You know, when you think of a Muslim artist, you think of the great, you know, artists who used to draw calligraphy and things like that. So I didn't continue that because I didn't feel like it was expressing my specific cultural expression here in America. Well, that's why I was talking about jazz and hip hop. But I can say that my Muslim faith makes me understand to always express the goodness of something. Don't express the terrible or the disgusting or the loathing of something, I would say. So that's what I would say about my faith. That's what I would say.
Last question before I turn it over, and there's been some great people, including the panelists, take a look before we close up here as far as in the chat room, because we really, so many of you have put out some really nice comments, and I and the panelists appreciate that very much. I also want to thank Doug Chair, our chairman, and Jacqueline Rada, and all of our volunteers, including Karina. Thank you so much, Karina, for participating tonight. And Karina has been putting together some absolutely super Instagram posts that we share on Facebook. I've been working with her on that. So, and also to the audience as far as spreading word tonight. So enough out of me. If anybody has any questions before we wrap up, it'll be great. No questions. Okay. All
I
right.
have a question. Can you stop screen sharing so that you can see the people? But I
Okay.
had a question for Larry about his use of chains. Can you talk a little bit about that, Larry, and tell me if if there's multiple meanings in the chains in those paintings? And like, why did you choose to put one on your easel? Which I found like
Okay.
really kind of fascinating. I'm going, why is he putting a chain on his easel? Do you feel like chained to your easel? I know I'm being literal, but that I'm just wondering if that, if there's something specific to that.
Yeah, well, yes, I do have a, can you hear me? Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
chains are very important. That was one of the first things that I learned how to use. I guess it has several recognitions. As I progressed in age, and we'll get to the latter part first. We'll go to the latter part first, and then I'll tell you the latter. Chains on a farm are very important. We use chains to tie around trees when we were pulling up stumps, when we are tying logs or big bales of material to tractors. Chain and tractors were very, very, very important because chain would never, because of the sturdiness. Now, once I moved through, I brought that from being a little boy. Chains were always there. That was the major thing. You had wire, which was sturdy, but the chain was the most important things. Ropes and stuff, of course, we used leather, but chain was the object to use to hook up to a tractor, to pull something, to move something that of a large weight. Now, later on, as I progressed through life and had gone into the Marines and did experience the world and what have you, and became abreast of what I was, didn't know what I was experiencing when I was in Georgia, as I was talking to you, saying earlier about the big house, the big white house, which it was a farm, and I'll just say the name, it was the coffee farm in Eastman, Georgia. And if you go there now, the house is still standing, but the plantation no longer exists. And the people lived outside or have gone, moved away, died off, or what have you. And when I got to New York and I was painting and I was reminiscing and going back into my experiences about change, and I understood slavery, and then I say, okay, how can I incorporate that and bring it forth and make a statement about the linkage to that whole process without being so literal. So change means a lot to me. I mean, it's stability, it's the connection to my great-grandmother, her, and my great-great-grandmother was white, because my great-great-grandfather was a slave who married the master's daughter. So consequently, it just comes down all the way down the line. And so that chain thing to me kind of connects not only the strength and stability of masculinity, but it also connects me to the femininity of the reason I'm here today.
Thank you for that answer. It's fascinating because I use chains in my work as well, but in a whole variety of ways. And that was one of the reasons I was wondering how many meanings you had going on there. And I use it to stain with. I use the rusted part, and I love that it has a duality, that you have it meaning both positive and negative as well. So that's nice. Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for your question.
All right, I think it's time to wrap it up. I just wanted to thank everyone. I think Aleathia wasn't able to get back on, but I'll definitely express my thanks to her. And Larry, thank you. And Khalid, Kha-Tees, Sabree, thank you so much. It's a very special evening.
And Mitch, let me thank you.
For what, messing up, not be able to get on because of an update on
Well,
Zoom?
better late than never, you know.
But thanks
We
again.
greatly appreciate your effort, though. It was very nice. I enjoyed every minute, and thank you, Mitch, for putting it together.
It
You
was
bet.
great.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience. It was a great audience tonight. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Good night,
Good
everybody.
night. Good night.